Which day two running back makes the most sense for the Dallas Cowboys? We'll tell you in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, do you know what I get excited talking about is day two running backs, not day one running backs. I love day two running backs more than maybe anybody else. So today we're going to talk about three of our favorite day two running backs. And I figured we should start with your guy, Treveyon Henderson, first, right?
Maybe so. Certainly, I think maybe my pet cat of this whole class, certainly the guy that I got the most excited about watching early on. A big fan. I'm excited to chat about him. So let's get right into it.
So we've heard a lot of buzz about Treveyon Henderson maybe being a first round pick. Maybe he still goes in the middle of round two. I remember some of the early mocks had him going to the Cowboys in round three. I gotta believe that's probably off the table now, right?
Yeah, I gotta think, if the Cowboys want Treveyon Henderson, they're probably gonna have to get him at 44. And I don't even necessarily know that it's a guarantee that he will be there at 44 at this point. I kind of think he will be, but man, it certainly it isn't set in stone. Some great numbers here just to kind of give you an idea of who the player is. 22 years old. He is a senior. But he's not one of these, 24-year-old seniors. He's a true senior. 5-star recruit coming out of high school, like it's mentioned here. I like him a lot because, we're going to talk about this where, you kind of find a way to slot these guys into different buckets as to what kind of style of running backs they are, that sort of thing. And I would say that Henderson, squarely kind of fits in that explosive receiving back type of bucket, right? Where he's a big play waiting to happen, that sort of thing. I think the difference between him and frankly, all the rest of the guys that kind of fit into this bucket is that he's a little bit bigger. He's 208 as opposed to the barely just clearing 200 pounds, right? So I think he could efficiently run through the tackle and be a well-rounded back. I think he's one of those guys who can develop into a kind of full-time running back. And then the other thing that really makes him, special beyond just being able to catch the football well, that sort of thing, is that he is a very experienced receiver and a very experienced and capable pass blocker, right? Yep. And I think that those are things that are going to really serve him well if he wants to come in and play a role on third downs early, is that he's going to be one of the few guys that I think that you can immediately drop into a third down offense and he'll be able to handle it and without too much problem.
So, Landon, he had 312 receiving yards as a true freshman with Marvin Harrison, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Emeka Ogbuke, and there's somebody else I'm forgetting. Oh, Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Yeah.
All in that same offense. He still was able to have 300 yards as a receiver that year. If you're watching with us on YouTube right now, you're seeing his career stats. I mean, productive all 4 years that he was there, averaged 80 rushing yards a game. 77 receptions for a running back coming out of college is pretty rare. And then averaging over 11 yards per catch, pretty unique.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, he broke the Ohio State freshman single game record in his debut, which I think he had 24 carries for 277 yards and 3 touchdowns. Broke who was it? Archie
Griffin.
Archie Griffin. Yeah. Freshman record. So yeah, a guy who, was obviously a huge recruit, had an enormous freshman year, dealt with some injuries his sophomore year, trying to recover from them a little bit more during his junior year. And then got another guy we're going to talk about here in a little bit, Quinshon Judkins, added to the team. And I think it really helped balance both of those players' games a lot, right? and really Henderson had an incredible senior year, especially down the stretch where he was basically unstoppable. Just a really, really fun, explosive player who I think, like I said, ready to go as a third down weapon, but also I think is the reason I kind of hold him separate from all the rest of these guys is that I honestly think that much like, Judkins and some of these other guys too, I think that if you wanted to build the rushing offense completely out of Treveyon Henderson, you have to be concerned about some of the injury stuff, but he has the skill set and the ability to certainly do that.
Here are some of the stable metrics via Pro Football Focus. Yeah, they're pretty good. 96th percentile rushing grade, 95th percentile yards after contact per attempt, 99th percentile gap grade. That's good for the Cowboys. They're going to be running more gap stuff. 60th percentile zone grade. So if you have to run zone stuff, he'll be okay. 63rd percentile receiving grade, 100th percentile fumble rate.
That's right.
I'll have to double check, but I believe he had one fumble on 600 career touches at Ohio State. So what do coaches like in the NFL, Lana? They like players that are reliable, that don't put the football on the ground, that don't get their quarterback killed and gets what's blocked. Treveyon Henderson, a lot of times he gets a lot more than what's blocked. You can see why there's so much appeal here for him. And I think if he's available to the Cowboys at pick 44, I have to believe that would be one of the easiest picks the Cowboys could make because they want a home run hitter at the running back position. That's the best guy in this class, staring you in the face.
Yeah, absolutely. Ready-made guy to go as a rusher and as a weapon in the passing game. I just think that, is a guy that adds dynamic athleticism to your offense immediately upon drafting him. And there's no kind of necessary learning curve to get him up to speed with pass blocking or to find a special way to be able to deploy him without exposing him as a pass protector. I just think that that's why I like Treveyon Henderson so much is that I just watch his game. It translates so obviously and so easily. It felt like after I was done watching him, I was like, what am I missing? Like, why is this guy not being discussed more? And I think it's one of those cases where he was hiding in plain sight, right? I mean, obviously his team went to the national championship. Quinshon Judkins obviously had an incredible year as well. We'll talk about him in a second. But I think that you just look at the situation and you're like, man, how different would this offense look without Treveyon Henderson? I think Judkins would have done a great job, but it would have been missing one of those explosive elements, especially in the playoffs when teams were taking away Smith and we're making a concerted effort to try to slow down Ibuka and Smith on the outside for Ohio State. Henderson and Judkins just were able to feast on the kind of boxes that they were getting and shows you the value of having an explosive running back.
So I had a comp for him. And again, this is not a perfect comp because I think he reminds me a little bit of Felix Jones, whether you want to say like shades of Felix Jones or wherever. And the reason why is more like the running style where I've seen people compare him to like Jahmyr Gibbs or Reggie Bush. And I just don't think he's that kind of athlete, like laterally, right? Like he's going to make these awesome juke moves in the middle of the field. But like with Felix, if you have something blocked for 8, a lot of times he'd give you 35, right? Because he's just going to be able to outrun angles. There's nothing like highlight worthy about it. Like he's just simply running past you, and he's a lot bigger than what you'd think. Felix came in at 5'10", 207. What was Henderson? 5'11", 208 or something like that. Yeah. I think the difference is Henderson is a much better receiver and a much better pass blocker than what Felix was coming out of Arkansas. But I think their roles are going to be very similar in the NFL.
I think as a runner of the football, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think, you're right. It wasn't so much that Felix was juking you out of your shoes. No. It's that he was running past you and he weighed, 10 pounds heavier than a guy that normally is running that fast. Right. So it's hard to bring him back down with arm tackles. And I think that makes a lot of sense with Henderson as well. I think that Henderson is like Felix Jones, except more skilled, right? More skilled in the passing game, more skilled as a blocker. Certainly I think a rare talent. You just don't see guys that come out like this ready-made for third downs very often. It's because he's not a, like a truly super well-rounded back in the sense that, the injury concerns in the middle of his career made you wonder about whether he could be the workhorse back. But outside of those questions, I don't think that TreyVeyon Henderson has very much, in the ways of holes in his game.
So if I could lock you into Treveyon Henderson at pick 44, not telling you what the Cowboys did in round 1 or what they're doing the rest of the draft, I'm assuming that would be like your favorite pick they could make. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I think it'd be a great pick.
I 100% agree. However, we're going to have a conversation about Quinshon Judkins, who is one of my favorite players in the class. Let's get to him next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. But getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. But that's where Gametime comes in, making it even easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. I love that they make it so easy to find better value in the app. So you can go to your sporting events, your concerts, your comedy events, theater shows near you. I just checked the Gametime app this morning looking for some tickets for an event that's coming up, and I was amazed by how good the deals were. Gametime also has the lowest price guarantee, or they'll credit you 110% of the difference. And with seat views available before you buy, there's no surprise fees, and they have the lowest price guarantee, so you can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That is LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're discussing 3 day 2 running backs that the Cowboys, at least we think, should be interested in. And let's talk about Quinshon Judkins, the other Ohio State running back. What did you see from his tape?
Well, first of all, I know you're excited about him because he's the only one that you put an exclamation point after in the rundown over here on our left.
I couldn't fit Quinshon Judkins in the one line, so that's why I picked.
Judkins is, again, like they both were shared the load at the national championship winning team. So it's not like they were hiding, but it does feel like these two are kind of cannibalizing each other's, candidacy to a large degree, because I do think that these are both incredible players. And first off, you look at the numbers here. Judkins is just a little bit of a bigger back, right? He is a little bit more power in his game. That isn't to say that he isn't explosive in his own right. He is still a very fast runner. Ended up running a 4.48 with a 1.51 10-yard split, which is extremely good. He's a violent runner with perfect temperament for a running back. And despite his good size, he has explosive acceleration, balanced skill set as a runner, could run through or around defenders as needed. Probably suffers in comparison to his teammate in the area of explosiveness, but he shouldn't, because he is second to none from 0 to 60. You can see him break big runs more often than other big backs. It seems like he runs with good flexibility and balance, can lower his shoulder pads and down to meet and then break contact. He's patient, then suddenly violent. He's got powerful leg drive to push through tackles. Finisher in the run game, and in the season, he does that was the one thing I loved about him, is that he just seemed to get more and more strong as the season went on. Like as the year went on, and at the end of the year, he was just basically untackable, because I think everybody else was exhausted. He was still kind of catching a second wind. He did his best work late in games after softening a defense up and late in the season. Needs development in the passing game, specifically as a pass protector and as a receiver beyond the line of scrimmage. This is, like I said, one area in which it felt like Henderson and him kind of cannibalized each other's prospect evaluation opportunities, because Henderson was just so good as a pass protector, and as a receiver, they just didn't use Judkins very much like that. And in turn, Judkins was so good at being a violent, powerful runner on early downs, softening up defense. You didn't see Henderson running, between the tackles as much his senior year as you did in the previous year. So I think that both of these guys can do the other job well. I would probably feel a little bit more comfortable about Henderson's ability to run inside than I would about Judkins' ability to pass protect coming right out of college. But let me tell you something. This guy's got no problem sticking his nose into the chest of a defensive end that's coming around the corner or chipping, or it's not going to be a willingness issue with a guy like Judkins at all. In fact, he may love pass protecting more than anything else by the time you got to get him up to speed with it. This is a guy who loves contact, who loves violence, and embraces it and enjoys it early. But that doesn't mean that he's not afraid to make you miss with his moves as well. I love Judkins a lot, actually. And if you go back, the thing that really made me love him is that, you know, you watch him at Ohio State and what he did there. And then you go back and watch what he did at Ole Miss. And at Ole Miss, like, he just looked otherworldly at times. Like, it was basically just him, and he was, you know, kind of having it all happen. I think that Judkins is being kind of, squared into a power back, you know, like that's what everyone's kind of viewing him because of his violent running style. But man, like, this is so much more of a balanced running back than that. I think he could be a superstar if he gets into the right system and is fed the ball enough. He reminds me a lot of Nick Chubb in a lot of ways. I think, you know, just that kind of explosive 220-pound back who I think could also be a powerful, dangerous receiver once he kind of develops that aspect of his game a little bit more.
So I wrote down some words as you were talking that stood out to me. Violent, likes to pass protect, physical, has the explosiveness to hit home runs. You know who that reminds me of, Landon? It reminds me of another Ohio State running back that the Cowboys drafted at number 4 back in 2016. And then that's not even using the size. I mean, the size is very similar. You're talking about
Comp's very serious.
Yes,
seriously, size-wise.
Yes, 6 foot, 222-pound running back. Both of them ran in the 4.4s. Judkins has the lower body. Look at what is the vertical, 38.5-inch vertical, 11-foot broad jump.
Yeah.
I do think there's a physicality that is infectious to the offense when he's out in the field, right?
Yeah.
He brings you something different from TreyVeyon Henderson. And I do think there's part of the Cowboys offense, or just the Cowboys in general, that could really benefit by having a junkyard dog at running back, right? And I think Henderson's a better player, just to be clear. And I think the Cowboys need that home run threat. But when you have somebody like this in your offense, we talk about force multipliers a little bit.
Yeah.
This is the guy that you want in mid-January when you're going to Green Bay and it's 8 degrees out and you need to start converting on 3rd and 2. Like, I do think there's some value in this type of running back.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, having a running back who's violent, who punishes defenses, look, I think there's something to the idea, and even if it's not as quantifiable as we all like to make it believe, as far as, you know, the idea of establishing the run, when you're playing defense and you're playing against a violent running back who likes contact, who enjoys punishing defenders when they tackle, it's exhausting, right? By the end of the game, you're exhausted, you're beat up, and all it takes is just a little bit, you know, 2 plays of 5% less effort because you're tired from tackling Judkins all day to make the difference in the game. So, yeah, I definitely think that if you're looking for someone to set the tone, like to establish a physical style of running in your game, to like kind of be the guy that is the physical presence on your offense, man, you couldn't do much better than drafting Quinshon Judkins as your running back.
Here's some of the numbers. What I like a lot about Judkins is he was incredibly productive at 2 big-time programs, Ole Miss and Ohio State. As a freshman, he had 1,700 yards and 17 touchdowns, averaging 5.7 yards per carry. He goes to Ohio State. He doesn't get to work, but he's still averaging 5.5 yards per carry, 59 career receptions. So that's 3 straight years of really good production. And then you go look at the stable metrics, not as good as TreyVeyon Henderson, but they're all really good. 77th percentile receiving grade, 57th percentile missed forced tackle per attempt, 51st percentile gap grade, 89th percentile zone grade, 56th percentile receiving grade. Just a well-balanced running back too. I actually think his best football is ahead of him because he's such a good athlete and he's so physical. If TreyVeyon Henderson isn't there at 44 and he goes a little bit higher, I have no problem with Judkins at all at pick in round 2. I think I would be thrilled if Dallas were to draft him with that spot.
Yeah, I mean, again, just to kind of like you talk about dominator rating all the time and about breakout ages, right? Like to lead the SEC, and I think he led in total yards, if I'm not mistaken, his freshman year, to lead the SEC in total yards as a freshman. That's a rare talent, So again, this is a guy that's being taken in the second round, right? Like that's how deep this class is. Is that in any other class,
back off the board, right?
Yeah, and probably in almost any other class, I wouldn't be shocked if this guy gets taken in the first round, just because he would be considered a rare type of running back in that class.
Well, if you compare him to Jonathan Brooks, I like him so much more than Jonathan Brooks last year, who was coming off a torn ACL that I just didn't think it ran with the same kind of power. I think Judkins is an NFL starter right away.
Yep.
They can handle 18, 20 touches and probably be pretty productive for you right out of the gate.
Absolutely agree.
All right. Let's talk about Dylan Sampson, because I do think after Treveyon and after Judkins, Caleb Johnson, I think there's a little bit of a gap. But Dylan Sampson is a really interesting running back that I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys were interested in. We'll get to him next.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Landon, let's talk about Dylan Sampson, a running back from Tennessee. He was behind Jalen Wright last year, who we knew the Cowboys liked a little bit. But I think Samson is just a better overall player.
Yeah, a little bit of an undersized guy, right? Kind of fits more into that bucket that we talked about that TreyVeyon Henderson is probably in, where you're looking at a passing game specialist, receiving back type guy. I mean, obviously he has first and second down running ability. We'll talk about that. But as far as like body types and where you would kind of slot him, I think you would draft Samson with the idea that he would be part of a committee. And that you potentially would have another, like a thunder to his lightning a little bit. He is, 200 pounds, but he's 5'8", 200 pounds. He's got smaller hands. He's got shorter arms. He's just a little bit of an undersized guy. But obviously the caveat that comes with that is that he comes with all the speed that you could possibly need, right? Yeah. Like he's incredible speedy back. I think if anything, there are times when it feels like he runs almost out of control. Like he's just so fast that you see him running up on the backs of his offensive linemen. There are times when he's just seemingly out of balance because he's kind of run. He's sort of run himself over his legs a little bit. You can see him getting skinny through the hole with burst, but often there are times when he'll stumble or be able to, won't be able to get the angle because he takes a weird step out of the hole. But look, I mean, the instincts, the vision, the patience, he understands how to use the speed in such a way where you'll see him set up his blocks, wait for them to develop, and then wait, go. And he kind of has that Le'Veon Bell type of patience behind the line of scrimmage to wait for things to develop and then to use the speed appropriately. So I think that when you watch him play, you see a guy that you just kind of are constantly worried. At least for me, I was constantly worried that he was going to just get absolutely destroyed, on some of these hits, because he does try to like string moves together at times, and he is a little bit undersized, but he does such a great job with his vision. Like he has really great kind of three-dimensional awareness, right? And so he senses a lot of these kind of odd angle hits, and he's able to make subtle moves at the last minute to not absorb all the contact. I do think that, he is probably more of a zone guy than a gap scheme guy. But I think that can be developed. I think, you see the patience with this guy to be a good gap guy. I just don't know that I saw a ton of it necessarily in his game. And as a receiver, I think you see it, occasionally, but he just wasn't really. It didn't feel like he got used as a receiver the way he probably should have been, and that makes me wonder if there is some deficiency that's being covered a little bit. But as far as getting the ball and running the football, like, he's dangerous in space. I mean, that clearly is indicated by the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, he led the SEC in total yards this year, or in rushing yards maybe. So I think there's obviously lots of production there. The question I have is this a guy that can kind of be a featured back on his own, or is he always going to be someone who needs a counterpart to kind of fully carry an NFL load?
Yeah, I liked him quite a bit, but I do think there's a gap between like him and some of the other running backs in this class. Yep. To me, I think he's more of a third round running back. Is that where you have him?
I had him. I don't have my board in front of me, but I think I had him at the very bottom of the second. So yeah.
Okay. So like, you're probably hoping to get him in the third round. Like,
yeah, probably. Yeah.
Here are some of the advanced numbers from PFF: 77th percentile rushing grade, 67th percentile yards after contact per attempt, 78th percentile missed forced tackles per attempt, 59th percentile gap grade, and you're right on the zone stuff, 90th percentile zone grade. The receiving stuff is not great, but they just, whatever reason, the Tennessee offense just doesn't really use their running backs that way. They've got the receivers split out to Timbuktu, right? So much so they just
on the sideline, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
He reminds me of like DeAndre Swift coming out of Georgia, like that kind of undersized running back. You're always a little bit worried about, can he be the featured guy? But you want to get him on the field because he's explosive, he's quick, he can make defenders miss. I think this is the type of running back, like, you bring Javonte Williams in and you sign somebody like Dylan Sampson. Sampson's your lead running back, but it's Javonte Williams coming in on short yardage and in pass protection and getting some of the dump off screens and all that kind of stuff. I still think there's a lot of value in this player as well. And these guys aren't available in the third round, but I would be shocked if Samson doesn't make it there.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. I think Swift is a really great comparison too, because I feel like he's a guy that, is going to come into the league in the kind of role that we described, right? Like as a lightning to somebody's thunder. And I imagine that he's going to have a lot of success, and he's going to be one of those guys, a lot like Swift, where you see him thrive in that role, and then you try to feed him a little bit more to see if he could be kind of the feature back. And I think that that's where the limitation is with this player. Probably. I don't know for sure because we just didn't see it necessarily, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's similar to Swift, if you didn't see, okay, now that he's become the full-time back, that there isn't a kind of degradation of efficiency.
Yeah.
Right.
You could see some diminishing returns with the more touches he gets. Right.
Yeah. So I think he could be a guy that you could be like more of your full-time guy if you needed him to be, but I do think that you're losing a little bit of kind of what makes him special and lightning in a bottle if you're unable to compare him with somebody who can kind of take the load off him a little bit.
I mean, honestly, what I would love for the Cowboys to do, let's say the first two rounds they go in different direction. Like they grab the receiver in round one, and in round two they grab a corner like Trey Amos, who I'm starting to really love. Mm-hmm. I could see a situation landing like, okay, round three it's Dylan Sampson. And then in round five, let's grab somebody like Damian Martinez from Miami, who's a 220-pound back that makes a living between the tackles. I think together that pairing makes a lot of sense, and you're only spending a third and a fifth to do it. Sign me up for that all day long.
I'm doing that a lot in these drafts now. I'm finding because the thing is that when you get down to the fifth round, like, the value is such that, man, there's just still so many incredible running backs left that it's like you almost feel bad not taking them off the board there. But if you drafted someone like TreyVeyon Henderson at 44, you're probably not. But I mean, I don't think that should rule you out, right? Like if you could go get a Kyle Monagi, right, from Rutgers, who I think is going to be available probably in the fifth round, right? Who's a physical, he's not a 220-pound back, but he's a physical guy who can run between the tackles and has that ability. And you paired it with someone like Dylan Sampson. I think double dipping at running back and getting a Thunder and a Lightning, because there's so many of these guys and because there's so many body styles and types, you can easily do that. So if you if you don't get a one of the top 4 or 5 running backs that you feel like who could, handle it on their own, it really is not an unattractive option to just double dip, and get a guy high, maybe in the 3rd round, and then hit another guy in the 5th round that can just balances out your running back room. And suddenly you've got a really good spot by just using 2 lower draft picks instead of using a 1st or 2nd round.
Well, the Cowboys have a history of doing this, right? They took Felix Jones and Tashard Choice in the same draft. In 2016, they took, was it Ezekiel Elliott and Darius Jackson in the same draft, right? So it's like they've done this before where they'll draft a running back early and they'll throw another day 3 pick on a guy that they like as well. This feels like the perfect draft to do that. And not even just with Samson. Let's say it's Treveyon Henderson.
Sure.
And then pick your round 5 running back, Ollie Gordon. I know that not everybody's a big fan of Ollie Gordon, but something like that I think makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, there's just so many of these guys and they're so talented. And, almost every single team needs more than one running back. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to double dip and get a bunch of talent at a spot for cheap. And see how much it can move the needle in your run game.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Make sure you check out the YouTube channel, download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.